Hey everybody, and welcome back to Jim's Garage. Have you ever been concerned about where your photos are stored? I'm talking about the photos that you take with your mobile device. Typically, these are some of your most treasured possessions because you can't get those memories back. So, with iCloud and Google Photos being the front runners, have you ever thought about what they're doing with your data or how those services work? So things like facial recognition, knowing where you've been with locations, knowing which shops you visited. That's all really powerful data that these big companies use to ultimately sell you products. Now, you might be fine with that, and I'm not here to change your mind, but what if I told you there was a self-hosted alternative that you could use, which would pretty much give you all of those features whilst being totally private? That's right, no one's going to be selling your data. Now, there'll probably be a few eyebrows raised around that because you're probably sharing your data elsewhere. But in terms of it being a valid alternative to some of the products I mentioned earlier, Immich can do all of that for you. So, not only does it have a mobile phone application that ties in natively with your mobile operating system, that's right, it means it can automatically choose to upload to that service instead of the others. And in terms of features, it comes with AI recognition, so it can recognize photos and objects in images, so you can do powerful things like search for images of a certain thing, be it a car or a person or a frog, whatever it might be. It also has things like mapping, so you can map photos to where you visited, and it also does transcoding of videos with GPU hardware acceleration. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy it. I'll talk you through some of the features and how you might want to configure them. We'll get it up and running in Docker, and then I'll show you some basic configuration and usage techniques. But before I get into any of the deployment and configuration, please heed this warning. It's absolutely vital that you have a robust backup strategy. I've spoken about my 3-2-1 backup strategy before, and if you're not familiar with that, please do go and check it out. I would hate for you to spin this up, start using it, and then lose all of your precious memories. Just so you're aware, there are a few ways that you can install and deploy Immich. We're going to be using the Docker Compose method, which is recommended, but there is an experimental one-click install script. There are instructions for using this in Portainer and Unraid, and there's even a Helm chart for Kubernetes, which we might come on to later in the videos. So let's have a quick look at the Docker Compose install. I'll walk you through all of the steps. I'll show you some of the tweaks that I've made for my setup. It's typically just the bind mounts and enabling hardware acceleration. Then we'll get into deployment and we'll have a look at this thing up and running and see what we can do with it. So heading over to their website, do heed the warning at the top. It does remind you that you shouldn't use this as your only backup strategy. Now, it won't be, given that you followed my previous videos with the 3-2-1 solution, so please do make sure you go and set up something similar to that. But anyway, let's jump into the config. So here is pretty straightforward. It's asking us to make a directory where we're going to store the files. It's going to tell us to download the compose file. We're then going to download the environment variables. So this is a separate file that sits outside of the compose file where we can specify some values. When you run that compose file, those referenced values will be called and populated. It's very similar to how you would do secrets. The final thing is the hardware acceleration YAML. Now, if you have a GPU available to your system, remember in my previous video where I showed you how to do GPU pass-through either using a discrete card or the integrated GPU, thankfully Immich can take advantage of that, and it greatly decreases the encoding speed thanks to hardware acceleration. In this video, I'm going to be passing through my Intel Arc A380. That's a discrete GPU that you can pick up dirt cheap and was in my recommended guide, so that I'll get all of the benefits of acceleration. So let's jump into the command line now. We'll download those files, we'll tweak them, and we'll get this thing up and running. So over on my GitHub, I provided all of the files that I've used for this example. Thankfully, you'll just need to tweak a few of these to your setup. So let's go through and have a look at that now. Starting off with the Docker Compose file, we can see that there are many containers in here. So let's have a quick run through that just to make sure we understand what's going on here. Now, the first one is the Immich server. So this is the bit that kind of pulls all of the other microservices together. Now, this, I believe, is where the images are uploaded and stored to, and you can see that within the volume mount here. So This is where we specify where we want the files to be saved. So when you take a photo on your mobile device and you hit upload, it's actually automatic. This is where it will be stored locally. Now, you could use a volume, but I prefer to use a bind mount just so I have access to it easily. This is going to get passed through the .env file. That's the environment file. We'll have a look at that in a moment. And it's going to depend on Redis, which we've touched on before, which is a memory-based key-value pair. So it greatly reduces the number of read-writes that are done to the disk. This is great for things like transcoding and will hopefully save some of the wear on your drives. Next is the database, and this is where it's going to store some of the metadata for all of your images. And finally is TypeSense. Moving down to the next container, we have the microservices. So this is required and is supplementing some of the image-based AI stuff that's going on, so transcoding, facial recognition, etc. The actual machine learning on the next one, I believe, is where the AI takes place, but focusing back on microservices, you can see that we can pass it the optional file of hardwareacceleration.yml. We'll have a look at that in a moment, but that is where you're going to specify your GPU if you have one. Now, it supports anything with QuickSync, so that's an iGPU on an Intel chip, or a discrete Intel card, or it can also support NVIDIA and AMD cards. And you just need to tweak the configuration to whatever device that you have. It's going to run the start.sh script when it starts, and it needs to reference the previous bind mount so that it can do things with our photos. So as I said, photos are stored in the upload folder. This requires access to those photos in that folder. Again, it's going to depend on the same services as before, and we put the depend so that it can't start without them. Next up is the machine learning, and I believe this is where it does all of the image detection. So it can detect things like, is this a person? Is this a car? Those sorts of things. Things that you're likely going to get on your iCloud and your Google Photos backup. Next up is the TypeSense container. Now, TypeSense is required for searching your images. So it will take your image, it will take what the AI has looked at it and defined it as, and then it would enable you to do things like yellow car. And hopefully when you type in yellow car, if you've taken a picture of a yellow car, it will show it. It's a bit like Google Photos does, where you can search for images, and it's pretty comprehensive. Next up, we have Redis. We've touched on this one before. There's nothing fancy to go through that container. So let's move on to database. Similar to a lot of the other containers that we've been spinning up, we're going to use a Postgres database here. And you just need to feed it your environment variables. So your username, its password, and the database you want to use. And for persistence, we're going to give that a bind mount so that if the container were to restart, we wouldn't lose all of our data. Finally is the proxy, and this is what's going to serve the web interface. So you will be able to access Immich through a web browser and perform all of your administrative tasks. So when we deploy this, we're going to access the web GUI to set up our account and get things started. As you can see, there are a couple of variables we need to specify in here, chiefly the server URL and the web URL. And if you're using a reverse proxy, like I do, if you don't know, check out my videos, we can pass through a nice friendly DNS name, which will mean we don't have to remember an IP and a port. And it's going to give us SSL encryption within the browser. For that to work, you're going to need to add your traffic labels here. So I'll add the traffic labels in my GitHub, but it's the same as we've done many times before. So if we head over to the .env file, we'll see a few things here that we can specify. Now, because I've used a bind mount, we don't actually need the upload location, which you'll see specified in the official documentation. If you were to change that, just make sure that you specify where you want to put this. The second bit is the version. I'm just going to leave this as release because that gives the latest one. You want to change the TypeSense API key to whatever your API key is. You can get this by registering on their website. The next is the database name. I've left this as Postgres. You can change it if you want to. The next section is the database credentials. So change these to something secure. And finally, we want to give it your server URL and web URL, which we just covered in the Docker Compose file. So this would typically be the Immich subdomain, then your domain.tld. Lastly is the hardware acceleration. Now in this case, I've mentioned that I'm using an Intel Arc. Now thankfully for both the integrated Intel GPU and the discrete, they both use the i915 driver set. So you can simply copy and paste what I have here if you're using an Intel iGPU or discrete card, and it'll work. If you need to change that up, i.e. if you're using Windows subsystem for Linux, you need to add the volume mount that's specified here. You'll also need to uncomment some of these sections if you're using an NVIDIA GPU. But hopefully it's straightforward, and you just need to uncomment these if you're using an NVIDIA card. You'll notice that this hardwareexcel.yml file is explicitly referenced within the Docker Compose file. So now that we have all of these files configured, let's copy those over to our virtual machine or bare metal, or however you're doing this, and let's spin up our Docker environment. So heading over to my Docker VM, we can see that I have the files copied into the folder that we're going to deploy from. This is where I keep my Docker Compose files, and we can validate that those are accessible by running the ls command. So both of those files are there. It's not picking up the .env file because it's a hidden file. The dot before the word creates a hidden file within Linux, but we know it's there. So let's go ahead and deploy this, and I've already downloaded the images beforehand because my internet's rubbish, so we can fast forward through this step. It will take a while to download because there's something like 9 containers. We can deploy this simply with the sudo docker compose up-d, stick your password in, and then it should be off to the races. Now that mine's all set up and configured, I'm going to hop into Portainer and just check a few of the logs to make sure that everything looks alright. So let's go and do that now. So over in Portainer, you can see all of the services that were specified in the Docker Compose file are now up and running. So some of the key ones are things like the server. So let me just check those logs. Immich server is listening on HTTP, so it's listening on all interfaces on port 3001. That's excellent. There's no error messages in there. And if we go to look at the proxy, we can see that the proxy is now listening on my IP address, that's my internal IP address, and it's port 2283. So hopefully we can just go to this IP address here with the port and we have access to it. And remember, if you're using this through your traffic proxy, you could use your image subdomain .domain.tld and access this through a friendly URL instead. So everything looks fine in the logs. Let's see if we can reach the service now and start some of the configuration. We also want to test the hardware pass-through, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Now, if you get an Nginx error 500 or a connection refused message similar to what I've got on the screen, it's likely that you've set your web URL, but you're not actually using a web URL, i.e. you aren't using it through a reverse proxy. So remove those environment variables and redeploy the container and you should be good to go. So if everything goes to plan, you should be able to go to your IP import and be presented with the Immich welcome page. Now, this is dead straightforward and you'll be up and running in just a few seconds. So let's whiz through that now. So let's hit getting started. Let's add an email, a password, a first name and a last name, and then hit sign up. So with all that populated, let's sign up and then we can log in. And when we log in, we're presented with the default dashboard. So as you can see, photos, explore, map, sharing, all of the things that you're probably used to in your existing photo application. You can see the remaining storage you've got in the bottom left. Now, as this is a bind mount, we get to see basically the whole Linux directory. We get to see that the server status is online and that we're running version 1.74. So there isn't really a great deal to configure after this. You could actually just start using this. One thing I want to show you though is the hardware transcoding if you're going to be using that. So you want to click on the administration. You want to go over to the settings on the left hand side and you want to go to the FFmpeg settings. Now if you've been following my video suite, you'll have seen this probably from Jellyfin. And this is the software package that's responsible for handling basically all video transcoding and pretty much anything to do with video within Linux. So let's click on FFmpeg settings and you can change all of these variables if you want. I'm not going to go into that in this video because it's quite a dark art in terms of how finely tuned you want these to be. You can make very seemingly small changes which will have massive impacts on render times. So do go and read up about FFmpeg. You can find tons of stuff on there, certainly in things like the Handbrake community as well, which is all about video encoding, software encoding, and all of those sorts of things. The bit that we need to focus on to check that we've got video transcoding is down at the bottom, where we want to choose what we need. So instead of disabled, I'm going to choose quick sync, because I'm using an Intel GPU. Now this is the same whether you're using a discrete or an integrated Intel GPU, and you would choose NV encoder, NVIDIA encoder, if you've got an NVIDIA card, and you can use VARPI, which is an open source alternative. So I'm going to choose Quick Sync. I'm going to hit save. It says it's saved. Excellent. So let's go and test that. So we hop back into Immich, and now we want to upload something. So to test transcoding, I'm going to upload an existing video file that I have on my computer. And if this works, I should be able to go into the Portainer logs for the microservice and see that it's done the transcoding. Hopefully we get a message that it did it. Let's go and do that now. So I click upload. I have a couple of video files I created earlier. These are just Dolby test images. So I'm going to click this one here and I'm going to click open. Now, unfortunately my ugly mug is covering it, but in the bottom right, there was an upload progress bar. So that says upload success. Refresh the page and we should see the video. So let's reload the page and you can see the video here. That's not helpful because it starts off as black, but now you see the video coming through. And this video is working absolutely fine, playing in the browser. Let's check that this video was transcoded using the GPU. So let's head back into Portainer now. So back in Portainer, let's head into the microservices container and check those logs. Excellent. We can see that there's some new lines now at the bottom of this container. And we can see here that it said start encoding video. And it said initiate hardware device QSV. That's quick sync video equals HW hardware. And it did all of the pass-through. It took the variables that are specified in the FFmpeg settings. And we got an encoding success. And given the time it took to do it, and we were able to play it pretty much instantly, that shows the beauty of hardware transcoding. So now we have transcoding configured and verified that it's working. We can add some additional example images. These are ones that I've taken on my phone, so they come with all the metadata from the phone. That will populate things like the map, so you can zoom into areas on the map and see where you've taken photos. So again, just simply click upload, select the photos that you want, hit open. That's going to upload them all, and again it's going to ask you to refresh the page. When we refresh the page, we should then see all of the photos that we've taken, and if you subscribe to my channel, hint hint, you'll have seen these images before. And if we click on those images, we get all the metadata from my phone and where it was taken, the time it was taken, and all of that good stuff. Heading back into the settings, there's a few things that I want to make you aware of. One thing you'll probably want to be aware of is OAuth authentication. Now, we're currently using just a username and password, an email address and a password, but you can use OAuth authentication and you can put in the server here and the client ID and secrets, etc. if you want to integrate it into your existing solution. Other important settings might be concurrency, depending on how much hardware you've given it. As I said, it can be computationally expensive to do multiple jobs in parallel, so a bulk upload might take some time. So you can limit here how many it's going to do at once, so it doesn't bog down the rest of your server. Another important setting, and this is in the documentation, is the storage template. So you can specify exactly how these are going to be stored, i.e. what that file name will look like, and that could be useful for if you have a specific way that you want to archive photos within the container, or in our case, within the bind mount. So now that we have a very basic image set up with some of the settings that I recommend, let's download the mobile application and test taking a photo and uploading it to our server, because ultimately this is probably the primary use case. So here I'm downloading the application on Android. Simply type in Immich, hit the download button and wait. Once it's completed, we're going to open and we're going to be presented with the sign-in screen. So the first thing you'll need to do is to specify your server. Now, you can either do that locally with IPs or via a WireGuard VPN or a proper URL if you're exposing this to the internet via a reverse proxy. Once you've done that, simply log in with the username and password that you created during the setup phase in the Web GUI. Once you're logged in, it's going to ask you for permissions on your device. Now, these are to grant it permissions to see the folders on your device. On Android, that's as simple as clicking allow. Now, once you've done that, you'll be presented with some of the images that are on your primary folders. So these are things that it's found automatically. You can see on the Android app there's search functionality, there's sharing, you can access the library, all of the things that you can do within the Web GUI. Now the key thing here will be to add new libraries so that you can sync exactly the folders that you need. It might not pick up, say for example, your WhatsApp folder or your camera folder. Other important features here, if we go into the settings, are the backup. Now I imagine you would probably want to turn on the automatic foreground backup and background backup. So what this will do is, in the background, whenever you take a photo, provided it's still running in the background, and Android can be quite particular about power saving, so do be careful of that. What it should be doing is then backing up your images in the background, and the foreground setting will mean that when you open the app, i.e. the app is in the foreground, it will then run the backup as well. So whichever setting you decide to do, just make sure that you've got it enabled and double check that it is actually doing what it says. Once you've done that, you can obviously then add more folders to the library to manage, and it should recognize them within the Photos tab. It may take a while to scan when you first add a library, but anyway, let's go and take a photo now on my device. I've just taken a photo of myself editing the video. That's now showed up on the home screen. And then we'll want to upload that asset. That's going to upload it to our image server, and hopefully it should be now uploaded and we can check. So heading back over to the web interface, you can see here the image that I just took on my camera of me creating this video. So let's click on that, and here we go. Here's a blown up image of that, and we can click on the info if you wanted, and you could see where I live. So everything seems to be working, and it really is that straightforward. Now, one other cool feature is if we took our images, like I've just shown you how to, we wanted to share this, we can also do that. Now, it's not quite as slick and as friendly as something like Google or iCloud, as you can imagine, because half the world's probably using those. But if we click on sharing, we can basically create albums that people can have access to. So we could create a shared album or create a shared link. And it's much in the way that you would share photos on Google Photos or iCloud. So we can create specific albums, and we can give users, which we create again within the administration tab, we can give them access to just the photos that you want to give them access to, and you could create an external link using the shared links if you wanted to. So hopefully I've given you the building blocks to go and deploy Immich and use it as a replacement for some of the common tools you were used to, but without the privacy concerns that are attached to them. I'd love to know how you get on with using Immich and some of your feedback from the product in the comments below. As always, if you've liked this video, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care everybody.